And welcome into This Life Matters. It's just Drew today. Gigi is in Abu Dhabi and she's out having fun on vacation. And so for right now, I'm just going to hold the show down by myself and have fun because Gigi's out just completely neglecting me. But she's going to bring me back some sand or something. I hope I can actually say that because I don't want you to get beat up in customs. You're already going to have a hard enough time coming back into the country. So. All right, so this week on This Life Matters, since I'm kind of handling things on my own, we're going to talk to a person that has just become a part of my life as I've journeyed to tell you guys I have a heart for anyone who's willing to lay down their life for us and to serve us and protect us, which means soldiers I have a special heart for, as well as our police officers. And one of the things that occurred to me was to become a police chaplain. And this man right here, as I began to think about it a little bit and seeing everything that was going on, I talked to him and sat down and really got a better feel for it and recognized that you've written a book on it.
Yes.
And so I read through the older version of this book, and it actually helped change my point of view on things, and it made me just sure that I was ready to sign up to become a police chaplain. So I'm going to allow him to introduce himself and just tell us a little bit about who he is personally.
Okay. My name is Danny Lynchard. I started in the Chaplaincy Corps about 34 years ago now as a result of one of our officers of the year had taken his own life in the patrol car. And I went to the chief and I said, isn't there something we could do? And he mentioned they were starting a chaplaincy program. I have a wife that I've married just recently, about a month ago. From Ukraine. Her name is Irina. I met her while we were beginning a chaplaincy program in Ukraine.
Congratulations.
Ukraine.
I did not know that.
Yeah. I've known her about 7 months, and I've got 5 grandchildren. I know I don't look old enough to have 5 grandchildren, but I've got 5 grandchildren, and they are the greatest. One of them is a good basketball player, too. I mean, he can nail it. But that's who I am. I'm also pastor of a church called Fisher Baptist Church in Sand Springs, America, and on 41st Street. And that's where we are here in our auditorium here. That's where we're doing this program.
All right. So for me, one of the reasons why I got into this was I was watching what's going on in America as far as, or specifically my community, right? Yes. And I'm seeing this thing where a lot of African Americans, or me personally as a black man, I'm looking at it as though, all right, I don't want to fear the police. I don't want to have issues or anxiety or anger toward the police. But it's hard when I'm watching the news and I'm picking up the paper and I'm seeing individuals die every single day.
Right. And
I'm thinking to myself, what can I do, to help bridge this gap? Because I just don't want to have that fear myself.
Right.
And so the police chaplaincy opened up an idea for me as a man of God, and I know that if my belief system helped change me, it helps comfort me. Is there a way that I can take what skills or what I have, and give it to someone else?
And that's why we were so anxious to get you. I was so glad you were willing to sign up and be a part of this. But, Andrew, it's funny. I hear you, and I know you as a man, and I don't see any reason you need to fear the police. Because here I am, I'm a white person, and I mean I'm white, and we don't fear the police. White people don't fear the police unless they have done something wrong.
Right.
And it's hard to get across to white people that there is a legitimate fear in the African American community for the police, and it's passed down from generation to generation to generation, and we don't get that. And many of our officers that come to Tulsa come from other parts of the country, and they come in here and have no clue what took place in June in 1921 when white men and policemen leveled the biggest financial community of black people in North America, in the world.
Right.
I mean, there were lawyers, there were doctors, and they had their own financial community, and they were growing, and they were the largest and wealthiest community of African Americans in the world. And in one day or a day and a half, over some misunderstood situation, the police officers and the white people of Tulsa went in and leveled an entire neighborhood, killed hundreds of people, and there was no way the African Americans in that community could win, but they put up a fight because this was their homes, and they burned homes, they burned businesses, and that's never been able to come back. It's
right.
I mean, and what police officers don't understand is that day was heard and talked about from their children, and their children talked about it in front of their children, and we're about a fourth generation down now, and that event is very much a reality in Tulsa.
It is.
In the lives of the people, and we white people don't get it. We just don't get it.
I think it's a hard concept, because you fear kind of what you don't understand.
Yes.
And so it's a hard concept to understand that. I didn't live here in Tulsa, never heard the story. And my experience was kind of rooted back to just what I had saw on television.
I see.
And so from a media standpoint, it was passed down to me because I was told I'm supposed to. Through the images of Rodney King and other things of that nature, I was just told that no matter how hard you try, this is a possibility. And I never really equated it to the fact that these individuals may have been guilty of something. I just looked at it as the only thing that they may have been guilty of was being black.
Yeah.
For me, I finally got over the hump and got over that fear once I realized, and this is where I can honestly say it is because of my Christianity that I was able to, but I finally got over the hump once I realized I'm innocent. Being black isn't a crime. Being who I am isn't a crime, and it's nothing wrong with that. So therefore, you're gonna have to accept me, and I'm gonna be cocky or bold about it. I'm gonna be who I am unapologetically, and because I have something to offer and something to give you back.
And you do that well, and that's the key. When the children of Israel went into the Promised Land and they came back to give their report, in the last verse of the chapter, they said, "We were as grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in theirs." And that's the message you're putting across here. I'm not a grasshopper. If I see myself as a grasshopper in my sight, that's what I'm going to be in theirs.
Right.
And you've got the boldness and the sense of purpose and the call of God that says, no, I'm someone in the kingdom of God. I have value. I have something to offer. And people pick that up around you. And they'll pick it up around anybody else who believes it.
And I think that's why the chaplaincy work is an important thing, because that boldness needs to be something that radiates through the community.
Yes.
If we as clergy who represent our community, I live in North Tulsa. My church is in Northwest Tulsa, but I represent a community of what you would say are the individuals that are forgotten about, the least of these of our society,
Yes.
And so I want my face, I want my belief system to be what represents, that boldness, because that's the spirit of the community. That actually is.
Yeah.
Where I'm from, I watched, the police come in my neighborhood multiple times and get in altercations and fights and different things. So I grew a callous toward the police growing up from a whole different angle, because in Kansas City, it was a whole different ball game, where a lot of times I did watch where we were people in my neighborhood were the aggressors. Mm-hmm. I watched where even in my own life, I was the aggressor toward the police. They couldn't ask me a simple question because I was going to give them a smart aleck answer. That's where I was in life. So with the chaplaincy thing, I kind of felt like, all right, how can I represent my community to just one officer? If I could stop one officer from being angry,
right,
I won't even say angry. In my mind, I initially thought anger, but then I realized in some cases they're just as scared.
Yes, that's true.
So from all the time you've spent around police officers, what would you say their general take is? Do you think they're angry? They're scared? How would you characterize it?
I think all of them will have to admit that they're afraid, and when you get afraid, anger often is the result of that.
Yeah.
And so you get both of that. And they're looking at statistics like this, and you and I are brothers in Christ, and we can talk about this where others can't. But they look at the the African American community, and they look at statistics, and they look at 40% of the crime is being done by 13% of the population. then they make judgments on the whole 13%. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so when they approach that, it's often called racism or whatever, but they're looking also statistically, and they're not looking at the individual. And that's, we're not going to solve a thing until we get to know who we are, and the only way I'm going to get over my fear is to get to know people like Andrew.
Right.
That he's representing the community, here's who he is. That's how I'm going to get over it. And I hopefully, when I wrote this book, I wrote it so that people could look inside the heart of a cop and see what they think and what they see. And sometimes they make bad decisions. Sometimes they make wrong decisions. Sometimes they overreact, but help people understand why that takes place. The same thing is when you take a community and you keep them living in poverty, you're going to see theft increase. You're going to see things like that happen. And so it's not necessarily judging the heart of an individual just by what you see the most of, but getting to know people in their heart and say, this is how I live, this is how I have to live every day. I wanted the community to look at this and say, this is how a cop lives every day, and maybe we could pull the two together.
What do you think, getting into this, what are the stories that, like, give me the outline of, or give everyone the outline of what this book is?
Okay. These are actual calls that I've been on with the police officers, and I've actually watched them do their job. Many of the names I've changed just because it's just not good to throw a name out there. I could, but there's a lot of paperwork you have to do and things you have to get signed in order to use the name. So by changing the names, you can get past all of that. But all these are real stories of officers going in. For instance, there's a story that doesn't have really to do with police officers, but it has to do with the community. And do I have time to tell it?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
There was a fire in one of the apartment complexes, and what had happened is a young boy, about 12 or 13 years old, and he was big for his age, and I mean overweight, had gotten in trouble with some of his buddies, and some of his friends came by, so-called friends, and they threw a Coke bottle with gasoline into his apartment, and it caught fire. His mother was an invalid and very heavy, and so he could not get her out of the bed. He ran in just his underwear because it was about 2 in the morning, and it was so cold the ice was forming where the fire hoses were dripping water. He ran in his briefs to try to get help, and by the time he got back, it was so engulfed, his mother had burned to death. When I walked around that fire truck, here's this young man sitting in his briefs on the curb crying because he wasn't able to save his mom. And I went to individuals in that crowd because the crowd had gathered, and I said, look, do you have anything, any clothes you can give this kid just to keep him warm here? And probably 4 people turned me down. And I saw this young man standing there in the crowd, big, tall, good-looking kid, had his girlfriend with him. I could tell by the way they were holding each other. Had on a nice Nike jogging suit with Nike shoes, and just a handsome specimen of a black man. And I thought, and he wore a weave with long hair, and I thought when I saw him, there's no need me asking him because I know everybody else turned me down. He's going to turn me down too. But I just felt led to go ask him, and I told him, I said, that young man doesn't have any clothes. And he looked at me. I'll never forget it. I still get teared up when I think about it. He looked at me, and he pulled off that jogging suit, shirt, pants, and shoes, and stood there in his boxer briefs, handed me that jogging suit to go put on that kid.
Yeah.
That was a moving time.
Yeah.
That was a moving time.
So this book is full of stories like,
just like that.
Yeah,
that's
shows,
one of them.
I think, one of the things that I never realized as far as what the police have to deal with, they respond to death calls.
Yes.
So
any death in a home that's not supervised by a doctor, from either there or at a distance, they show up at. Yeah.
Okay. As well as and we obviously know they have to respond to murders.
Yes.
Now here's something that you've shared with me in the beginning in my training when it came to telling me everything that goes into becoming a chaplain. How if a body's on the ground, it has to remain there.
Boy, I'm glad you brought that up. That is one of the biggest discussions and areas of conflict, and I understand it. If the body's lying in the front yard, now the police are there and people are gathering around, and somebody in that crowd is going to call the family. And so the family's going to show up, and they're going to want to do just what I'd want to do. They're going to want to go there and hold that body and cuddle it up and make sure it's who they think it is. But the police can't do that because now they've got a crime scene. Any new footprints in there, anything that touches that body, they call it contaminate, takes away and makes it harder to investigate and find out who it is. Not who it is, but who did the crime. So you've got family there, and you've got crowds building up, and the officers are saying you can't see it. And it takes a long time for all the people to get there that need to, because first of all, there's the fire department. It comes first. Then IMSO's right behind the fire department. Then the uniformed police officer. And they have to call the detectives. So they call the detectives who get up, get their equipment together, and they get there. And it's easy for 45 minutes to pass by now. Maybe. Right. The detectives get there, they rope off the scene, but they are not in charge of that body. That body is, the authority over that body is to the medical examiner's office, and they have to make sure nobody comes in there and does anything until the medical examiner comes and examines the body. And the medical examiners cover the whole northeast part of Oklahoma, and there's only a handful of them that do it. So it may be another 45 minutes before the medical examiner gets there. So now we're at 90 minutes. The crowd's gathering. There's a body out there. Someone said, why don't you put a blanket over it? Well, you can't, because you put a blanket over it, then you contaminate the body with fibers and blood. So it's just there. And the family begins to say things like, they wouldn't do this if it were in South Tulsa.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be this long. And they begin agitated. And I understand, because I would want to be right there touching that body and whatever. And people like yourself walk up to that crowd, because I believe the people they trust most in the community, and people they should trust most, are the ministers of that community.
Correct.
So our chaplains come from that community. They learn what the police officers do, and they go to mom and dad, and they say to them, this is what happened. They tell them just what I just told you. That helps, but they still want to see if that's really their son. The shock and disbelief just won't let you hardly believe it. And through the years, we have worked with the medical examiner's office to the point now where they wouldn't allow any family, any contact whatsoever. Now, after they put the bags on the hands and feet and load them on the gurney and put them in the body bag and roll it toward the hearse that's going to transport, they allow us to bring the family up at that time. And the family can touch the bag, touch the body, and we'll have a prayer, and then they'll transport the body on.
Yeah.
And that helps. That was something they could do. Another thing is, we've talked them into getting a screen. You know, if we can't put a sheet over the body, can we at least put a screen to block the crowd from viewing it? And there are screens that are available. It depends on the wind whether or not we can use those screens or not, but we can block off the view from the media and from the people.
How hard is it to respond to that from your perspective? And also, it's a double question. From your perspective as a chaplain, how hard is it to respond to those type of scenes? And then also share with us, what's it like for from what you've heard from the police officers who have to respond to those things?
The police officers hate to have to deal with the family because they want to be the good guys as much as they can. The police officers love the fact that their chaplain's there and will go in person and talk to that family and communicate for them and build that trust for them. They love it. They love the fact that there's a ministry of chaplains that are there. My perspective is, when I go up, and it depends on where in the community it is, I get a chance to bring the greatest healer to the greatest hurting in Tulsa. That's what a chaplain gets to do, to bring the greatest healer to the greatest hurting. We're not there to become their pastor. They have a pastor. We're there to become the spiritual and emotional paramedic till we can get them to the care they need and get them through those first few hours. So anyone that's called to do it, and I got to be honest with you, I feed on it. You know, it's like the red and blue lights go on and a cop gets all excited. Well, when I have to go to one of those scenes and I'm headed that way, the adrenaline's pumping because I'm going to be able to help some people get through those first few hours. And Andrew, as you know, they don't know what to do.
Right.
You
right.
know, what do we do now? They've taken the body to this place called the medical examiner's office. Where is that? If I needed them, how can I get to them? And we give them the information they need. This is where the medical examiner's office is. This is the phone number. These are the steps you need to take. You need to start calling people before it's seen on the news media so the rest of your family doesn't find out by watching television, and help them through those times. Now, I will tell you, in all honesty, if the crowd gets upset, and sometimes they do, there's nothing better in this world for me to see a minister from their own community like yourself step up on that scene, because I can't do what you do there. I would love to be able to say I can do it, but I can't do what you do there. I can't do what Lim does and Duran Goudot. I mean, they're members of the community, and they're the same color, and they walk in, and they have an immediate camaraderie. I have to earn it, but they have it immediately.
Yeah. So for you, going through this book, writing this book, what was one of the more difficult stories? Because you've shared with us one of the stories that was close to your heart, that really moved you and changed your perspective on things. What was one of the stories in here that was a very difficult one for you to get through?
One of the ones that was most difficult is when I was called to come back down to the police station. That was when the booking room was in the City Hall building where we are now. Not in the City Hall, but in the police headquarters building. City Hall was right next door, and the booking room was there. And it was one of our police officers was being arrested for molesting a stepdaughter. And I knew this guy, and I would never have suspected that. And to walk in there when they made that arrest and see them take his gun and his badge, and his face just turned completely ashen and white, and he looked at me and said, "I don't know what to do." And that, to see someone who's supposed to stand for something, to be charged and eventually convicted and serve jail for that thing, that was the hardest thing, because to me, they were my heroes. And now one of my heroes had stepped down or fallen down. And that was pretty tough. That was pretty tough. The other one that really gets me is, we got time for this?
Yeah, we've got time.
Okay.
We got time.
I don't want to dominate this thing. But there on Southwest Boulevard, there was an apartment complex, and the story's in there. And the fire department had called me over there, and when I walked in, there was a mother seated on a couch with her hand in her face, and she was just rocking. And I found out, they had me go back to the bedroom, and I saw a little baby. He was just weeks old, and I looked on a pillow, and I saw the little blood spot on the pillow, and I knew what had happened. He was asleep with her. She'd rolled over and suffocated him. That was a tragic enough story, but I found out that this young girl, nobody really paid much attention. She didn't have a whole lot going for her. Her boyfriend that got her pregnant hated her because she wouldn't abort the baby and left her. And that baby made her accepted. She was accepted by her, grandmothers and mothers and dads. And wherever she went, people would have that new baby, and it made her a somebody. And in that one moment of wanting to be so close to that baby, she lost it all. And before the medical examiner came in, I asked, would she like to hold the baby one more time? And she said I would. So I brought her back there, and I sat her in a rocking chair. And I picked that little guy up, and I put him in her arms, and she threw him to her chest and just wailed. Just screamed over and over again. The fire department was looking at me saying, well, you're the chaplain, do something. And there was no words. And I looked at the fire department, the firefighters, and I said, guys, let's just pray. And we both, all of us, bowed our heads. There's about 6 in the room. And we just prayed under our breath. And while we were praying, God spoke to that woman screaming and holding that baby. And she began to sing, Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong. And calmed it down. It was a miracle, just as much as anything else. God spoke to her heart. Yeah. I'll never forget that one. I can tell you the kid's name. His name was Terrell McPeoples. That's how, and that was probably 15 years ago or so.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a sign that you really care, like that you're out there and you're doing this. What about when it comes to working with the officers? What are some of the things that you would say outside, not just the African American community, but just all of us? What do we need to do to make their day easier, to help a police officer out?
And I know this is hard for some people because of some of the things you've told me. You've got to be bold. But things would go well or much better if, when a policeman stops you, keep both hands on the wheel, don't reach for anything. If it's night, turn on the dome light so he can see you in there. Don't be offended when they fill that car full of lights, because that floodlight is their protection. They're going to shine. They don't know who they've stopped. And when the officer walks up there, here's what you don't say. Officer, what's the problem? I don't know why, but that sets it off. Well, a good thing to say is, you would not have stopped me for no reason. What do I need to do, or what did I do? And from there, just do what they tell you. If you do what they tell you, unless you did something wrong, you're probably not going to go to jail. I mean, these guys don't spend 13 weeks training and put their whole, well, it's more than that. I'm sorry, not 13 weeks. It's about 6 months training, then a year in a patrol car being watched and field trained. And they're not wanting to lose their job just because they arrest somebody falsely. Not most of them. You've got some bad apples, very few, but you do have some that will. We've had officers that would stop Hispanic people right after the first of the month because they figured they had money. And this particular officer would have him leave his wallet in the front seat, come to the back of the car. And while he went to go, the young man was with his hands on the trunk of the car. This officer would go up there and take his money out of his wallet. He's in jail now.
Yes.
And they prosecute him. Our chief will prosecute. If you do things like that, you'll go to jail for it.
Yeah. So tell everyone the name of the book and how they can get a hold of the book.
The name of the book is The Heart of a Cop, and it's on Amazon. And get it this month, because if you wait till March, they're going to charge you taxes.
Okay.
Yeah, they started charging taxes on Amazon in March.
I think it's one of those things that, for me, I just look at it as I can't live my life in fear. Once I start seeing fear set in, that's when I felt like, okay, I got to do something to go beyond this, because it's unnatural for me to want to live with a certain level of fear of any demographic of people.
Right.
I want to be bold enough to step into any room.
And the Bible says the Lord did not give us a spirit of fear,
yes,
but of love, power, and a sound mind.
Yes, sir. Thank you for joining me.
My privilege, Andrew. I'm glad you're joining us.
Yes. All right. So before I close out This Life Matters, I want to say something to the This Life Matters family. We lost a faithful and very loyal watcher and listener, a young man by the name of Jeff Hoke, who was once one of my students and the program and student disciples in our recovery program. And Jeff, when he left the program, he still stayed in contact with me and loved every Monday watching This Life Matters with me and Gigi, and just thoroughly enjoyed it. And unfortunately, Monday, he ended his life. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that for us is we absolutely love Jeff's the way he watched the show, and he would ask us questions, and he was into it, and he felt like he was learning and growing. And so I've cried, I've laughed, and I've thought about the idea of loving the fact that This Life Matters gave us a vehicle to speak into Jeff's life before the end of his life. And so we're praying for Jeff and his family. And, Jeff, I'm just going to say it directly to you, just knowing that you're listening in heaven, like that being a hope, is that I love you, we love you, Gigi loves you, and we thank you for listening. As for everyone else, Make sure you join us next week for This Life Matters. I'm going to be on my own again. Maybe I'll go ahead and head back to the studio or back to the Orison line. And we never know who the guest will be, but I will make an announcement this week to let you know who I'm going to have on for This Life Matters next week. We love you guys for listening, and thank you for listening and watching. Thank you, Mr. Danny, for coming on. And also, let me ask you real quick. If someone's watching this and they're a pastor in the North Tulsa area or in the Tulsa area, and they have a heart for trying to bridge that gap between their community and the police, how could they get involved?
Tell them to write me at dlynchard@cityoftulsa.org, and I'll give them all the information they need to know and see how God speaks to them. dlynchard@cityoftulsa.org.
All right. Once again, thank you guys for listening, and see you guys, as Georgine would say, see you next week on the radio, although we don't do radio anymore. So.